Last week, we introduced the idea of the business model being the dominant organizational method of churches today. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that's what we did, at least in Western culture anyway. We looked at some of the characteristics which describe that model and the fact that many of these characteristics are part of church culture today. We recognize that in this society, there are certain things that churches need to do or should do that are part of the business model. Incorporation is one. Riverwalk has done that. We are incorporated as a nonprofit organization. The board of directors is also the elders, and so we've got the bylaws and all of that we follow. Insurance, we have insurance. We're taking bids on new insurance for the coming year. Bank accounts, business-related activities, contracts, that kind of thing. We also noted that in at least a couple of places in the New Testament, the business model did seem to appear. One notable place was in the book of Acts, where the apostles appointed others to oversee the work of benevolence because they thought they were being neglected, and so the apostles said, we don't have time for this. We need to devote ourselves to prayer and the preaching of the word, and so they appointed others. But the part of the business model that seems to run most afoul of the New Testament example is the idea that church leaders and staff need to be providers or even entertainers, and the members of the church are the consumers or those who are entertained. In this portion of the model, the church leadership is constantly working to find something new and different in order to continually create some kind of an experience, and I have that in quotation marks, of some kind for the consumer, so that the consumer, that is the members or those who are attending, will continue to consume what the leadership provides rather than go on to the next church, which might have what they might consider to be better entertainment and a better experience. This kind of mindset brings about in church members a what's in it for me and an I need to be fed or entertained mentality on the part of the member or the visitor, when in reality it seems to me that maybe we need as members to look more toward humility, service, worship, relationship, and the brother-sister-sibling bond that we've been talking about almost since the beginning of this class. That bond in the church family that we've been discussing, that bond is not all that it should be, and sometimes it's pretty much non-existent in a church where the leadership are the providers and the members are the consumers, because it is so easy just to hop from church to church to church and never really develop those long-lasting relationships. I want to continue to look into the business-like church description. I think this is important to do. The three things specifically that we're going to look at are paid staff, sermons and classes, and marketing. Paid staff, sermons and classes, and marketing. And yes, Riverwalk has paid staff. And yes, Riverwalk has sermons and classes. And I guess you might say that we have some semblance of marketing, and we'll talk about that. You'll notice that when we talk about these, that Riverwalk itself is into these more or less, depending on kind of what they are. We'll take a look at that. As in much of what we find in life, much of what matters is not so much that these things are a part of what we are, but rather how we utilize those things and the importance that we place on them, not the things themselves. After all, at least insofar as sermons and classes are concerned, we see numerous examples of that in the New Testament. It's very biblical to have sermons. It's very biblical, I think, to have classes. My guess is, when people met from house to house, as we see in the New Testament, a lot of those centered somehow or another on some kind of class or some kind of teaching. We also see specific instructions regarding support for preachers and even elders, and Curtis talked some about that this morning. And as for marketing, there really was a measure of marketing done in the New Testament church. The apostles and teachers early on would go to the temple, or they'd go to a synagogue, or they might even find a group of people in a public place somewhere, and they'd begin to teach or they'd begin to preach. The signs and miracles that were part of the New Testament church likewise, I think, were in part what we might call a marketing tool. They called attention to the message of the gospel. They called attention to the apostles and the teachers. And those signs and those miracles were confirmation that what they were saying was true and factual. So what is it about these three things? Paid staff, sermons, classes, and marketing that maybe should give us pause or should give us some concern in the present day. Let's take a look at those, and we'll be open, obviously, to discussion as well. Now, at the outset, please understand there's nothing wrong with paid staff. We have paid staff. We have unpaid staff as well, but we have paid staff. Nothing wrong with that. Paul himself says that it's good and it's right to pay church workers, 1 Corinthians 9. Rather, it's the expectations, I think, that the church places on paid staff which causes it to turn into a business model. If each member of the church, if each member of the body is a priest, and I think we can say that scripturally, if each member of the body is a priest, if each member of the body is the recipient of the command of Jesus to make disciples as they go about their lives, we talked about that 2 or 3 weeks ago, then each member has a responsibility to carry out that work, that command, in some way, shape, or form. Paying someone else to do that for him or her is not generally the way that's done. However, in modern culture, the work of the church family that rightly belongs to each measure is often shoved off onto a paid staffer or to one of the elders or one of the other leaders of the church. The general excuse for doing that, which many use, is that, well, members are all really busy living their lives. They're busy raising families. Paid staff has more time to do those things. And besides, that's what we pay our staff to do. People are busy. They can't be expected to give more than a couple hours a week to the church family and to the work of the body. And again, I'm not talking about Riverwalk specifically. I've said before in my disclaimer, this is the church in general. Most of our members have had a hard week. Go easy on them on Sunday morning. There's so much on the calendars of families nowadays, there just isn't time for any kind of church work. We've all heard, I think, those reasons. Ministers even can easily get caught up in the idea that they're indispensable wheels in the church family mechanism. They'll take more and more upon themselves with the attitude of, if I want it done right, I'll do it myself. And that becomes kind of a never-ending circle where the more someone takes on, the more that others are going to ask them to do. And it isn't long before the burnout comes and his house of cards collapses, and there may well be spiritual carnage as well in the aftermath. You've seen, if you've been a church member for very long, at least vestiges of this kind of thinking. Even at Riverwalk, I must admit, it's sometimes difficult to find people who are willing to step up some of the various areas of service and support. Sometimes it's difficult for we who are on staff or in a leadership position to delegate or to ask for help. I'm guilty of that. I'd just as soon do it myself rather than ask for help. It's just easier to do it ourselves rather than try to ask several members, to take the time to ask several members by email or phone call or whatever it is to try to commit to something. And it's certainly easier than teaching and mentoring members regarding simplifying life and living, making time for God, and taking seriously Jesus' command to make disciples. Sometimes it's just easier to do it ourselves. Comments. Churches that are businesslike tend to rely on paid staff to attract and retain members.
The problem with it is that it can keep members from being a significant part of the body of the church.
And that's an issue. If we, as paid staff or elders or whoever, just decide to do things ourselves rather than take the time and, dare I say, take the trouble to find someone who would be willing to step up.
Or the expectation, like you said earlier, that we have a staff so we don't have to do anything. We just have to go to church and it hurts.
Put our money in so we can continue to have paid staff, and they'll just take care of everything. And that's, there are, don't misunderstand. I think there are a lot of people in this congregation who do a lot of things, I've said it before, that nobody knows anything about. Nobody is going to give them any medals for what they do. They just quietly go about and provide a meal, or they provide a ride, or they do something during the course of the week or the month that is just very, very valuable. But I have to admit that it is sometimes tough for me to try to figure out who I'm going to ask. I think part of that is a fear that they're going to say, no, I can't do that. I really think so. I think part of that is a fear of mine that they're going to reject that. And somehow or another that goes on me. It doesn't, but somehow or another it does. I mean, nobody likes to hear no. Everybody likes to hear, yes, I can do that, Shelley.
I don't think we've had a class from this book, but there's been a book that I've heard mentioned in several instances called The Simple Church.
Right.
Are you familiar with that? And I thought, right now, hopefully coming out of the pandemic, things don't seem as frenetic. I mean, a lot of the programs and things to do haven't started back up again, or may never. But one of its points was when a church decides to do something, that can just snowball. There can be programs after programs, and if you never stop and evaluate them to say, is this the kind of thing that's really making an impact? Is it serving real people? Is it helping us grow spiritually, whatever
Or is it just something to do?
or is it just something that we've done for a long time and we'll just keep doing it, and it takes up a whole lot of people and wears them out? And it was a really interesting book, and gave some examples of things that a lot of churches do that eventually they looked at and said, not sure this is the best use of our time and resources.
It's always a hard time to find somebody that wants to do something. If you say, I ask you to do this or do that, no, I'm not interested. It's just like we have to go back and find somebody to serve.
And I'll give an example with Joelle in here in just a minute or two.
I think we have to go deeper into this overall idea of what are we creating, what are we facilitating in church, in the body of Christ. Programs and the like tend to create volunteers, and people burn out on being volunteers. And so we have to, and we're talking about this is a deep issue, many layers, so I know you're covering the surface, you know, you're starting to dig down. We're kind of paradigm shifting our minds, and that takes a while. But truly, I think at the heart of what we're going to get to is the idea of being disciples for Christ. And that goes beyond being a volunteer.
Right.
It gets to the heart of it. It gets to what our purpose is, like you were saying, what is the purpose
Right.
of what we're walking towards. And I think the breakdown is programs have a leader, and they're not really even a leader, they're kind of the volunteer coordinator. And so I think, you know, that doesn't give people, you know, what am I here for? I serve my mission here and then I'm done, as opposed to an overall idea of being a disciple
Right.
under the within the church.
And that's the goal of this. And it's not just a 2 or 3 month thing. This is going to be kind of an ongoing effort, I think, is to bring us to the point where we understand what it means to be a disciple and do the best we can to fulfill that. Shelley, to your point, I got a couple of comments to your point. The elders and staff, or at least the elders in Curtis, read Simple Church before COVID. It's been, 4 years ago now, 5 years ago, something like that. I think shortly after Curtis came. And it got us to wondering, you know, at the time we had, you know, several different programs and so on, and it got us to wondering, you know, are we just doing this just to be doing this? And we evaluated, I think, several of those things. One of the notable ones was Simple House, actually. You know, and we dug pretty deep into that, actually, in terms of, is this doing any good? Is this, you know, are we accomplishing anything here? Are we going anywhere with this? And there were some other programs we looked at too. Some of those we don't do anymore. We would have once every summer in the heat of the summer, just as an example, we'd have an ice cream social for the homeless out in the back here. We don't do that anymore. There are a number of reasons for that, but the class is not to explain that, but that's one of the ones that we just don't do anymore. And in terms, I said I'd say something in terms of Joellen. She needed a ride this morning because Linda Hooten was not going to be available this morning. And I knew that from way a week ago. And I kind of agonized on whether I needed to even send something out or ask somebody for help with that. I think I ended up asking Linda to send an email out. I think many of you got an email. I got no response. And I just thought, okay, I sent the email out, Pat and I'll just go pick her up, you know. And so we did that this morning. And I'm not saying that in a way of being critical by any means, but I just didn't want to take any more time, you know, to call somebody or to figure out where somebody lives so maybe they could go right by or something of that sort. And okay, we'll just take care of this, you know. And that way, you know, among other things, that way I knew that Joellen would be here today, you know. And it's that kind of an attitude that I had this past week just with this that I'm talking about here. Go figure. Go figure. Let's go on. Business-like churches rely on sermons and classes. I'm glad Curtis is here now. To provide all the encouragement, correction, and instruction for the congregation. And I want to give this caveat. Listen to what I said. Business-like churches rely on sermons and classes to provide all the encouragement, correction, and instruction for the congregation. Daily Bible devotions, daily prayer, meditation, quiet time, journaling, fasting. Where have you heard those terms? The spiritual disciplines. Curtis has talked about this extensively. The spiritual disciplines have in large part become a thing of the past in the business model of the church. And as I said, Curtis has spent a lot of time teaching on the spiritual disciplines, emphasizing their value. I know that several of you utilize one or more of those, but often these are put aside in the course of a day or a week in favor of other things which occupy our time. And the spiritual, you don't have to be a part of all those spiritual disciplines. Maybe fasting is not your thing. Maybe meditation is not your thing. Maybe daily devotions is not your thing. But there are other things that we would call a spiritual discipline that might be your thing. And we dare not just push those aside and just rely on Curtis or Doug or someone to give us what we need in terms of spiritual food for that week. Instead of carving out time for the spiritual disciplines of some sort or another, we rely on the youth minister to keep our young people entertained as well as taught. We rely on the pulpit minister to see that the congregation has its spiritual needs met. We rely on Bible classes for our instructional and learning time, never opening our Bibles or other spiritually directed literature at any other time. Bible classes are good. Bible classes are not mandatory. Some churches don't have Bible classes. They have only the worship services. Preaching is good. There are several examples of preaching in the New Testament, but these in and of themselves are not going to fully meet the spiritual needs of anyone. Individual study, meditation, prayer, whatever the spiritual disciplines that you best relate with, these are essential to fill out and complete the spiritual needs of the Christian. One of my spiritual disciplines is sitting out on our back patio. I just sit out there. It's relatively quiet. There's nobody that lives behind us. It's the park. And I just sit out there. I was out there yesterday evening when it was cool enough that I really should have a wrap on. And that's one of the ones that I use. You know, there are a multitude of ways. There are a multitude of ways that you can work to better fulfill your spiritual needs. Sort of like someone that goes on a diet of only hamburger and green beans. Now think about that for a minute. I was going to say a Big Mac and fries, but let's do the hamburger and green beans instead.
I got these real nice patties that you can buy now. Just throw in the pan and go get a can of green beans, or you can get a package and get 2 meals out of the package. So
There you go. There you go. But if you go on a diet of only hamburger and green beans, or if you prefer Big Mac and fries, one of these, the hamburger and green beans, is good for this next sentence. The Big Mac and fries probably isn't good for this next sentence. My next sentence is, both of these foods are good and good for a person. Well, I don't know about the second, but the hamburger and green beans, nothing wrong with either one of those, but the diet is incomplete. The body needs nutrients found in other foods as well. The diet needs to be expanded to fill out and complete the physical needs of the body. This kind of thinking readily leads to the provider-consumer mentality that we spoke about earlier. I'm going to quote Jack Wilkie in the book, one of the books that I'm using. The business-like approach to church creates customers who can only give a few hours a week and who can only consume, which places the onus on the providers to keep serving up these spiritual meals for the customers. Customers then choose the church where the preaching and teaching best meet their needs and the style that they prefer. Comments? Don't be afraid to comment on Curtis and his sermons. He's a big boy. He can take it.
Jay, I don't have sermons. I have homilies. That's different.
When you're not on vacation.
That's right. Yes. comments
does
on
an
that.
outstanding job on the sermons, I appreciate that.
I'm sorry?
I appreciate you and Curtis a lot, you do an outstanding job on that.
I'm glad you brought her today, Jay.
All right, the third one. Business like churches rely on marketing. Rely on marketing. Many churches of today believe that the best way to reach people, in other words, to reach or to gain customers or consumers, to reach new customers, to reach new consumers, is to do things that businesses might do to attract customers. Think about it. We find a good location for a building where there's a lot of traffic. We put up a sign that attracts attention. We advertise in various ways and places. We offer special events from time to time. We offer programs that people can be involved in. We provide an experience that will make people want to come back. I'm reminded of many of the venues in Branson, Missouri. Many of you have been there, haven't you? Especially those that advertise a great experience if one would just buy tickets for their show. Sight and Sound Theater website even has this description. How many of you have been to Sight and Sound? There's a number of you have been. I'm not running down Sight and Sound here. They're an entertainment venue. This is their website description. A spectacular entertainment experience for the whole family. Sight and Sound takes theater as a whole to a whole new level. Every show is an epic experience with a meaningful message, where edge-of-your-seat action meets heartfelt drama. Now, for those of you that have been there, that pretty well describes it, doesn't it? An epic experience with a meaningful message. We've been there more than once. We've thoroughly enjoyed the shows. We'll go back again if the opportunity arises. I think the one in Branson is showing Jesus right now. But Sight and Sound is not a church. Marketing for them is essential. So do we look at the success of an organization like Sight and Sound and try to incorporate marketing strategies like that into our own congregation? Well, we want visitors and members to be consumers of the singing, sermon, classes, videos, the youth group, the whole worship experience. Are we, in essence, selling ourselves to the customers, just as Branson shows do? And how can we, I guess the point there is, if we try that, how can we continue to provide an epic experience week to week, month to month, year to year? I mean, one week, Curtis could dress up like Victor does, and that'd take care of it for a week, but then what about the next week? And what about the week after that? Maybe the week after that, he could wear a hat. I don't know. Is that an epic experience?
Not for anybody else.
So how did Peter, James, Paul, those other preachers and apostles, how did they market the church? What did they do or say to encourage people to come and experience the church? Well, I'll try to tell you in the few minutes I have left. Today, the idea of marketing the church experience is based on offering events, programs that appeal to the customers. Seems that churches of today, many believe themselves to be woefully lacking unless they have a singles program, youth ministry, life group ministries, service projects, other events, other programs. Again, nothing wrong with programs, but what is it that's really important? When we look at the Acts chapter 2 church, we see that their marketing consisted of fellowship, worship, prayer, preaching, study of the Word, Old Testament Word, because they didn't have the New Testament Word, that initially caused the church to grow. Think about it. It was those things that caused the church to grow. We also see meeting from house to house. We see eating common meals together. We see sharing resources with each other. And the church grew. One thing we see in this passage that we often overlook is how they did these things. Verse 46, Acts chapter 2, says that they did these things, and I'm quoting, with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God. With great joy and generosity, all the while praising God. Attitude is just as important, if not more so, I think, than the action. Maybe it's time we inserted a little more joy or a little more generosity. Maybe we need a little more praising of God in the things that we do for and with the church family. I wonder if that would change anything. What we don't see in the New Testament church is a young families ministry, a seniors ministry, some other program. We do see the development of a kind of a benevolent program where people willingly shared with others in need. And later on in Acts, we'll see the apostles appointing special servants to see to those needs. But other than that, I don't see much else in the way of events or programs. Not to say that youth ministry is a sin or that partnering with Franklin Elementary or whatever is unscriptural. What it does say is that if we overly rely on the business model of Churches for Our Growth, marketing, paid staff, programs, and so on, we're probably heading off in a direction that might not be what God intended for us. Comments?
So I don't know that I could really compare the Acts 2 church to the church today in terms of marketing, because if you're looking at the people of the first century church, everything is new to them. So of course that they're hearing this message that's new to them, and they're excited, they have a joy. And so of course that message is going to spread a lot faster than it is today. If you're looking at the world today, most people have a knowledge of Christianity. I mean, especially in the United States, people know the story of Jesus already. And they're not interested in hearing that message again unless there's a new way for them to hear it and they have that joy that comes from this new way. So of course it's going to be very different in the way that you reach out to people today than it was in the first century.
Agreed.
So maybe in the first century they didn't necessarily need all of those programs. The church today, I wouldn't say needs those programs, but they need to connect with their communities. And I can't tell you personally how many people have told me that they thought that our church went out of business after Rick left, and we stopped a lot of those outreach programs that we did because our name is not out there in the community anymore. We're not like a lot of the churches in Delano that do mass mailings. We don't put on a lot of programs in the community, and that's what's helping those churches expand and get their names out. It's not the programs, it's that people know that they're there and people know that they care. So it's just all about how you go about that within your own personal community.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We're selling, the first church sold a new product. I mean, you think of the Greeks, they said, what are you talking about? One God?
Yeah.
What about all the, they've been practicing a totally different
Paul's sermon at
things and so it was something totally new, and they had their Tesla out there, so it made it easier, and like I say, we're in a more competitive environment.
And again, I'm not saying these programs are wrong or there's anything terribly bad about them. Over-reliance on these programs, I think is where this is going to.
Jay, I think the same thing happens with businesses in terms of their marketing plans. If I had $5 for every time I heard, I had no idea that speech and hearing clinic existed.
Had no idea what?
The speech and hearing clinic at Wichita State existed. I could have supported that clinic for the next 10 years. So it wasn't that we weren't there, we weren't doing good work, but it took getting out there. And the hearing aid dealers who market got more business than we did, even though I believe we had a better product. So, it's a hard world to navigate in today's overpopulated world.
It is. It's tough to know, and just a quick example would be the sign that's out front. We spent a lot of money on that sign, and should we not have one there? Well, no, I think there's value in that. I think there's value in having it out there. Should we not have our name in big letters on the side of the building? Well, no, I think there's value in having that out there. Just a couple of very quick examples of that.
But perhaps the signage at the airport that we tried for a while as a marketing tool was not the best place to put that. Sure. So, those are the kinds of things I think we have to evaluate. Where do we do that, and how does our living by example and talking with people about what we do, where we worship, have an impact as well?
If you recall the couple of years that Jim Fly was on staff, he was a businessman, and he knew marketing, and he tried marketing, as businesses do, and that didn't go very far. What did go far was when Jim would just start visiting with somebody about their spiritual life, and he knew them well enough and they knew him well enough that they were willing to visit with him about that, and that's where he got some results, was in the one-to-one, just visiting with people. Now I don't know how he managed to make contact with those people to begin with, but the marketing stuff he didn't work very well.
I think also the Jabara Airport's been having a lot of problems, because I've been catching up on the county commissioners meeting, and they're trying to do a lot more advertising and trying to bring more business in.
Okay, I was like, what was I gonna say? I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think you're right. I think that when we're in the community, that's hands-on. That's Jesus. Jesus's hands and feet in the community serving people. So I don't think we're really talking about a one, this or the other, and, to the exclusion of. But when you talk about marketing, it's just like Dawn said this morning, we're just another name out there with the thousands of churches in Wichita that people could choose from. I think what people are looking for, they're looking for more, and I think the world at large is looking for something beyond this Sunday-centric idea of that's what church is Sunday morning. And I think that's why you have seen people trying to go bigger and bolder, because that's all they have is Sunday morning. And where does it stop, And like Dawn said, the more you do, the more it's out there, the less impactful it becomes. So then they're looking for new and better, and so you just get on this wheel of when do we satisfy the people? But I think if you're seeking to build the church, I think you've got it flipped upside down. And you'll probably just continue to hear this from me, but this discipling idea, this one-on-one, this smaller groups, smaller, within the bigger body, smaller groups that can show that love to people. And I think when you're connected in that way, I think that joy comes naturally. If I'm fed with my church body Monday through Saturday, then Sunday morning worship will just naturally be more full of joy and more impactful. You guys don't have to do anything more because I'm coming with it.
And I did hear the bell. One more comment. In all of the big Sunday morning stuff that churches do, for those of us who maybe don't do that so much, we may get lost a little in the fray, the Sunday morning, whatever you would call that. We may get lost in that. That needs to be, I agree that somehow needs to be made up somehow, but I'm wondering whether that needs to be made up through the days of the week in kind of what she's talking about. It takes longer. It's not as flashy. It's more work. It takes more time. It takes more effort. You may not see results right away. We'll talk about this more next week. Okay? Thank you. We'll see you next week.